Welcome back, Principles of Accounting 2 students. We are going to work on another homework problem. This one is, or at least it's similar to one of your homework problems. This is also with variances, and it's going to be, you're not only going to have the overhead variances in this one, which you probably won't see on test, but you'll have the material and labor variances, which you definitely will see on the test and the final. So very important. Again, this is another extremely complicated for where you guys are in the process problem. So it'll probably take you an hour or so to do this problem when you actually sit down to do it. But it's also a very important concept to be challenged on this stuff. So I'm going to show you how to handle a problem like this. I'm going to actually try to adjust the screen while we're talking, and it won't work. Let's see. There we go. All right, I've got it adjusted for us. And if you look, it is problem similar to 23-28 in your textbook. And actually what we'll start here, you can see I've already done it, so yay, it worked out. They don't give you much here. It's Head Start manufactures headphone cases during September. The company produced and sold 108,000 cases. So one of the things I'm always going to coach you to do, make that a little bit smaller, is to put everything into an Excel spreadsheet. And I took the time to develop this spreadsheet. You'll have to develop your own spreadsheets. It's kind of like making a lightsaber. You gotta make your own. So here I've got headphones, and it produced and sold, so it actually did this, 108,000 units. Okay. And if you remember from before, all my red cells are numbers that I'm going to have to plug in from the problem, and then these are all formulas. Okay, so let's see, 108,000 cases are recorded, the following, and then they have this following data. So one of the more painful things, and then down here is everything that they're asking us to do for the problem, but we'll get there in a sec. They give us this data. Now this data is in a slightly different format than your other problem, and you're going to see that. You're going to get data in different formats throughout your lives, and so one of the things I'm very proud of is I'm not teaching you guys how to fill out forms. I'm teaching you guys how to be able to solve problems. Very different. Like if you can understand the data, you can understand if you do, and you will often make mistakes. Whereas if you're just filling out forms, then, well, you don't really need to be here. All right. I mean, you could be here, but you don't need a college degree to fill out forms. But what do we got? We've got standard cost information. We got actual cost information. We got direct materials, direct labor, variable manufacturing overhead. Let's see, we got some problems. One of the things this problem does a bad job of telling you is that the overhead is allocated based on direct labor hours. It just sort of doesn't mention it, but you can figure it out by seeing that it's allocating by hours here. Let's see, we got direct materials, 2 parts, $16 a part. So if we come over here, I've got a direct materials section, I've got a direct labor section, I've got an overhead section. Alright, so parts per headphone, standard. So here's our standard cost, standard, 2 parts per headphone. My cost per part is going to be 16 cents, 0.16. Now, if you don't have this formatted right, it might say 0 because it's going to round 0.16 to 0. So make sure you have 2 decimal points in these things. What automatically fills out, because I set it up that way, I have a cost per headphone. Right? Well, if it's 2 parts per headphone, and it costs 16 cents a part, it's going to cost me 32 cents a headphone. I actually don't need that data for this problem, but I like doing stuff like this. I can also figure out my total parts. How do I do that? Well, standard is going to be at actual units, right? So I am going to take my parts per headphone, 2 times 108,000 headphones is going to give me 216. And I can do my total materials cost, which is pretty neat, right? I take my total parts times the cost per part. So I have all this data here just from these 3 little pieces of information that they gave us. So that's nice. All right. Now I also have direct labor, 0.02 hours. All right, so my hours per headphone, 0.02 hours. And $9 per hour. That's my cost per hour. Again, all this stuff fills out for me, right? My cost per headphone, it's going to take me 0.02 hours times headphone times sorry. It's cost me 2 hours per headphone times my cost per hour. It's going to cost me 18 cents a headphone, which means very little labor. It's a very highly automated business. 18 cents in labor cost is nothing. That's like 4 hours of a teacher's salary. So you get your total hours, C11 times D1. Let's see, my hours per headphone times number of headphones gives me my total hours I've worked. So it's 0.02 hours every time I make a headphone. Made 108,000 headphones, 2,000 hours worked at $9 an hour, which gives us our total labor cost of almost $20,000, $19,440. So again, and we've just put in 2 little data points plus our units. All right, now we have, again, standard cost, variable manufacturing overhead. You got 0.02 hours. Here we go, 0.02 hours. No, that's not it. 0.02 hours. Put that in a slightly different spot. Hours per unit. Hours per unit. Yeah, that's it. The same numbers up here. I'm surprised I put that in there. My cost per hour is going to be $11 an hour. And that's going to tell me that my variable overhead is going to be $21.60. How do I do that? I say, well, it's 0.02 hours per unit times 108,000 units. That doesn't feel right, but that's right. Okay. Now we have fixed manufacturing overhead of $33,320 for static budget volume. Fixed overhead here. They're just telling you $33,320. We're fixed, and there's my fixed budgeted. Boom. Remember, this is budgeted because it's for static budget volume of 98,000 units. 1960 hours, and it's telling you my static cost is $17 an hour. That's nice, because remember, we have to calculate this applied, which just automatically calculated. So I know if it's $17 an hour, I worked actual. Where are my hours? 2160 hours. Yep. Okay, there we go. Yeah, couldn't find it for a second there. So $17 an hour times my 2160 hours means I applied 36,720. And my actual we'll do in a minute. So I budgeted 33,320 based on these units. Actually made these units, so I actually ended up over applying. Alright, that's probably, now down here I just did a little check me box. What I did is I took my $33,320 in fixed overhead and divided it by my static hours, gives me $17 an hour, which is exactly what's here. So just making sure that the numbers they're giving me are sane, or if they didn't give this to you, you could still figure out your overhead per hour to calculate this applied. Alright, that takes care of this table here. Next one down, we have direct materials. Now these are actual costs. This is what actually happened. Alright, so we did 214,000 parts. One of the ways you know you've done these right, or at least right-ish, is that these numbers aren't that off. If this number was like a 2 instead of a 214, you know, you're probably putting the wrong number in there. My parts per headphone automatically populated again, this isn't a number we're probably going to use, but I took the 214 divided by the number of headphones, 1.98 parts per headphone. That's good to know. Maybe some take 1, some take 2. It averages out to 1.98. All right, what's our cost per part? 0.21 cents. My cost per headphone, again, you take the 21 cents per part times the 2 parts, gets you 42. And your total material cost, which is going to be your 214 parts times your 21 cents per part. So this is how much it's going to cost me, and I'm going to go ahead and play around with this for a second. I don't like how I'm formatting here. There we go. And actually, let's put that guy there and get rid of some decimals. Now I've got dollars there. Very nice. Now down here, we're going to have direct labor hours, 1,660 hours. Where does that go? Right there, 1,660 hours. Notice again, just like the last problem, here they gave you the material to calculate this number. Here they're giving you that number. And so you have to be able to kind of get what you're doing. It's a little bit dense. $9.15 an hour, and there's your cost per hour. Got my cost per headphone. Again, we're probably not going to use this data, but it's going to cost me $9.15, that many hours. You multiply the two, 14 cents a headphone in labor. Got my total hours, got my total labor cost, which, again, me being Joe, I'm going to get rid of those decimals because they're useless. All right. So I expect it to cost me $19,000. It cost me $15. That's good. Yay. What's our overhead? Overhead, they're just giving us the total number of variable overhead. Now this number is pretty far off, right? I mean, here we got 2,160. Here we got 8,000. It is what it is. I could calculate here the hours per unit, but I'm not going to bother because I know I'm not going to use it. Here we got our fixed manufactured overhead, 26,000. So I budgeted 33, I applied 36, and my actual was 26. Now we have all this data in the box. I could say I'm done with this, and I can make this a little bit larger, and now we see. So again, the cool thing about Excel, I set this up, granted it took a couple hours, so that all I need to do is add my data, and it's automatically going to populate. And so here, now this is a slightly different order than what's in the homework. I think the homework wants you to calculate this, then this, and then you go down a little bit, but you're going to calculate all of this stuff. First thing they want you to do, and here are the answers. Ooh. Now, your data will be different, so your answers will be slightly different. So my direct material cost variance, very important, right? Here's the formula from the textbook, actual cost minus standard cost times actual quantity. So what I'm going to do, and remember these are usually cost per unit when they're talking about these. So that's cost per part. Also, these are in absolute value, so if you take standard minus actual or actual minus standard, doesn't necessarily matter. Minus actual cost, and I'll multiply it by my actual quantity. What's my actual quantity? It's my actual quantity of parts. All right, now the question is that favorable or so cost variance is measuring whether or not you paid more than you expected to. Let's see, I expected to pay 16 cents, I paid 21 cents. That's unfavorable. I paid more than I expected. All right, get rid of that. So here's my direct materials efficiency variance. Actual quantity minus standard quantity times standard cost. Again, still on materials, so we're still in here. Actual quantity, which is your total parts, minus standard quantity times standard cost. $320. Now remember, this is always absolute value, so you could always just come up here and go equals absolute value, put another parenthesis around it, and then you get a positive number. All right, so is that favorable or unfavorable? 320. Let's see. I'm looking at whether or not for efficiency variance I used more or less material than I expected. And let's see, I expected to use 216, I used 214. That's good, that's favorable. So I saved $320 there by using less material than expected, but I paid a lot more for it. Woo, a whole lot more. All right, so now it's our direct labor cost variance. You'll notice that this formula is the same as this formula, and that this formula is the same as this formula. So that's good, right? Except instead of dealing with labor or materials, we're dealing with labor. So same concept, go a little bit faster here. Except we'll go equals actual cost, and that's cost per hour minus standard cost times actual quantity of labor hours. 249. Are we looking at favorable or unfavorable? Let's see, I expected to pay 9, I'm paying 9.15, that's unfavorable. Ooh. Okay, now we're in our efficiency variance, right? We're gonna take our actual quantity, and that's your total hours. And I'm gonna do something a little bit different here. I'm just gonna grab standard quantity minus actual, instead of actual minus standard. And I'm doing that so I get a positive number. It's okay. It shouldn't matter in this formula. Times, oh, except it doesn't, you know that, times standard cost, $9 an hour. Again, here we're asking about labor efficiency, meaning did we work more or fewer hours? So we paid our labor guys more, but they worked fewer hours. No, they worked fewer. We wanted them to work 2160, they worked 1660, that's good. So that's favorable. So that's nice, we're paying them more, but they're more efficient, higher skilled labor, yay, okay. Now we have our variable cost variance. So if you remember from the last problem, it gives you this funky formula. Really that is actual cost times actual quantity, but we could just go ahead and use their formula. Actual variable overhead, which they give us, minus standard cost. What is our standard cost? It's going to be this $11 times actual quantity. Now again, we're allocating variable overhead based on labor hours. So we're going to take the actual labor hours. And if I did this right, which I did, it's going to give me a negative number. Again, we do this in absolute value, right? So a couple ways of doing that. The easiest is to go absolute value and then put that formula in parentheses. It'll give us a positive number. Format it as a $sign if you want. All right, so my variance is $10,260. We don't have negative dollars in variances. Is that favorable or unfavorable? Well, let's see. I'm looking at my actual variable overhead and my, well, I can just go to cost really because it's cost variance. I expected it to cost me $11. It cost me $5. That's very favorable. $10,260 of money I thought I'd have to spend that I don't have to spend. That's nice. Now we have our efficiency variance. So that's going to equal your actual quantity. Actual quantity of what? Well, variable overhead is allocated based on labor hours. So we take our actual labor hours, and I'm actually going to use the variable first. minus the standard. I'm doing this to get a positive number, times your standard cost per hour. Now, is that favorable or unfavorable? We want to go back to the quantities. I expected to work 2,160 hours, I only work 1,660, that's favorable. Now we have the fixed overhead cost variance. A little bit more straightforward, right? We take our actual minus our budgeted. We got the actual here, and we got the budgeted here. Both of those are given to us. And again, we want these in absolute value, so you could always do budgeted minus actual. Is this favorable or unfavorable? We budgeted 33, we actually spent 26, that's good. And in here, we do the budgeted minus the allocated / applied. We've already calculated the applied back in the day, so I take the budgeted, I'm going to do them backwards. 3,400 is the difference between budgeted and applied, which kind of makes sense because I over-applied. Right? I took 17 bucks times the actual number of labor hours, and I applied this. So I budgeted 33,000, I applied 36. That's actually favorable because you get a refund. And that is your homework problem.